At 4:12 p.m., on August 14, 1943, a mechanic from Pittsburgh stood on the bow of a wooden patrol boat holding a weapon that should not have existed. Around him, 8 Japanese Zero fighters descended in attack formation. The Navy's official guns could not track them. Every man on that deck knew they were about to die. They had seen it happen before. 7 boats lost in 6 weeks. 18 men dead. The same attack pattern. The same blind spot. The same ending. But Sergeant Calvin Rohr was not holding a Navy weapon. He was holding something he had built himself from mail-order parts assembled in secret, tested in defiance of every regulation that governed his existence. A rifle nobody trusted. A rifle nobody approved. A rifle the officers had laughed at just that morning. In exactly 2 minutes and 58 seconds, that forbidden weapon would bring down all 8 enemy aircraft. Every single one. 0 friendly casualties. 0 damage to the boat. And the men who had mocked him would stand in stunned silence, staring at the wreckage smoking across the waves. But that ending had not happened yet. First, you need to understand how one man's refusal to accept acceptable losses changed the entire Pacific campaign, and why the Navy never officially acknowledged what he did. The summer of 1943 was a nightmare for PT boat crews operating in the Solomon Islands. These fast wooden boats were supposed to be hunters slipping through enemy waters at night, launching torpedoes at Japanese destroyers and supply barges. They were never designed to fight aircraft. Their defensive armament consisted of twin 50-caliber Browning machine guns mounted on swivel platforms. On paper, these weapons looked formidable. In reality, they had a fatal flaw that everyone knew about, but nobody fixed. The mounts could not depress low enough. Japanese pilots from the 201st Air Group operating out of Balale Airfield discovered this weakness by mid-June. A Zero could drop to wave height, accelerate to over 300 knots, and slip beneath the firing arc of every gun on a PT boat. The American gunners could hear the engines screaming. They could see the green tracers coming. They could do absolutely nothing to stop them. Doctrine said this attack pattern was impossible. Doctrine said no pilot would risk approaching that low because of prop wash and spray. Doctrine was written by men who had never watched their friends die on a wooden deck while holding useless weapons. On June 4th, motor machinist's mate Harold Chen, 22 years old from Tacoma, stood at the port gun on PT-207. He was tightening a feed cover when a Zero swept in beneath the firing arc. The tracers walked across the deck before he even looked up. He died instantly. Rohr had played poker with Chen the night before. He helped carry his body ashore. 10 days later, Seaman Robert Donovan, 19 from Boston, caught a burst to both legs during another low sweep. Rohr held pressure on the wounds the entire ride back to base. Donovan bled out 1 minute before they reached the dock. The medical officer wrote catastrophic femoral trauma. The men wrote nothing. They did not need to. Everyone understood. Then came June 27th. PT-214, commanded by Lieutenant Gerald Morrison, was tracking transport barges near Vella La Vella when a single Zero approached from the east. Too fast. Too low. Too precise. Morrison's boat opened fire with the aft 50-caliber mount, but the fighter skimmed beneath the barrel like it was following a script. The cannon burst cut the cockpit in half. The boat burned for 30 minutes before slipping under the waves. Lieutenant Morrison had been popular, quiet, steady, a man who treated enlisted men with respect. Rohr had stood watch with him dozens of times. His death shook the entire squadron. The statistics were undeniable. 7 PT boats lost in 6 weeks, 18 dead, 32 wounded, a casualty rate approaching 40%. And every single loss followed the same pattern. Low approach, blind wedge, dead Americans. The Navy's official response arrived in a single line buried in a maintenance bulletin. Mount depression within acceptable parameters. Acceptable parameters meant acceptable losses. Calvin Rohr refused to accept either. He was not supposed to be the one to fix this. He was a machinist's mate, a working-class kid from the south side of Pittsburgh who had grown up 2 blocks from the Monongahela River. His father worked the Homestead steel mills. By age 12, Calvin was sweeping metal shavings off the shop floor. By 16, he was repairing neighbors' radios for cash-tuning carburetors for dock workers machining replacement parts on battered lathes that rattled like they might shake apart at any moment. He worked with his hands because everyone in his family did. Strong hands, calloused knuckles, blackened fingernails. The smell of cutting oil and hot steel followed him everywhere. He boxed in the evenings at the local gym, not because he liked fighting, but because he liked precision. Foot placement, timing, angles. He learned to read movement, predict outcomes, strike first when he saw an opening. When war came, he enlisted in the Navy, expecting machinery and engines. Instead, through a combination of paperwork errors and timing, he found himself assigned to PT boats, where improvisation mattered more than regulations, and where men with mechanical instinct were worth their weight in fuel. But even there he stood out. Not because he was loud, not because he bragged, because he would not accept things that did not work. If a gun mount jammed, he pulled it apart. If a part broke, he made a new one. If a weapon performed below specification, he tested, measured, modified. His flaw was simple. When something failed, he refused to stop until he understood why. Officers called it insubordination. Other enlisted men called it stubborn genius. Rohr just called it fixing the problem. By early July, he understood the root cause of the blind spot with mathematical precision. The mounts on PT-class boats were limited to a 9-degree depression angle. Anything lower required completely different geometry that did not exist on Navy vessels. The Zero pilots did not need to be geniuses. They simply attacked from 10 degrees below the deck line, slipping perfectly into the wedge where no American gun could follow. Rohr explained this to the engineering officer on July 8th, pointing to hand-drawn sketches with carefully measured angles. "Sir, the mounts cannot track low. The fighters know it. They are exploiting the same wedge every single time." Lieutenant Harrington barely glanced at the paper. "It is within spec," he said. "With respect, sir, spec is getting men killed. That will be all, Sergeant. Dismissed." A week later, Rohr approached Lieutenant Garvey, the squadron's gunnery officer, and demonstrated with a chalk line on the forward deck. "If a fighter comes in at this angle, we have zero coverage. I could stand here with a canteen and throw it at the plane before anyone could track him." Garvey did not even step closer. Mount angles were set by design teams in Washington. They know what they are doing. Another wall, another death sentence. The crystallizing moment came on July 23rd. Bosun's mate Eddie McKenna, 20 years old, red-haired Bronx native, sat on the edge of the pier beside Rohr. They watched the sun dip behind New Georgia as the heat lingered on the water. Eddie lit a cigarette. "They will hit us again tomorrow," he said quietly. "Yeah," Rohr answered. "And we still cannot track them." "No. So what do we do?" Rohr said nothing. Eddie exhaled smoke toward the horizon. "We are going to die out here, Cal." The words were not dramatic. They were factual, spoken like weather. And that was the moment everything clicked in Rohr's mind. Frustration became obligation. He knew the root cause. He knew the blind spot. He knew men would die until someone changed something. But official channels had rejected every warning, every diagram, every measurement. That left him with one option he was not supposed to consider: break the rules, fix the problem himself, risk court-martial to save the squadron. The idea had been forming in his mind for weeks. It would not involve modifying the mounts. It would not involve re-engineering Navy weapons. It would not involve asking permission. It would involve a weapon the Navy did not issue, a weapon officers ignored, a weapon he would build with his own hands. The trigger came on July 29th, just after 10 at night. Rohr was tightening a junction box on PT-219's starboard engine when Eddie McKenna appeared in the dim light shirt soaked with sweat, breath ragged. "They got Carter," Eddie said. "Torpedo Man Leon Carter, 23 from Mobile, Alabama. He had eaten breakfast with them 12 hours earlier, laughed at Eddie's jokes, played harmonica, talked about his wife's postcards. Now he was gone. Same low pass, same angle, same blind spot. Eddie's voice cracked. "Cal, we cannot keep doing this. You said you had ideas. You said you could fix this." Roar's jaw tightened. "They will not approve anything. Then do not ask. If you have something, do it. I do not want to die out here." Eddie walked away, leaving Roar standing in the humid stillness. His hands were black with grease. His shirt stuck to his back. His mind was made up. That night he entered the forward compartment of PT-219. The space smelled of solvent rope fibers and the faint metallic tang of fuel lines cooling after shutdown. He locked the hatch, clicked on a single red utility lamp, and unwrapped the plain cardboard boxes he had kept hidden under spare canvas. Inside lay the components he had ordered through a mail catalog under the pretense of personal gunsmithing tools. A machined steel receiver, a vented barrel shroud, a recoil spring assembly, a hand-machined magazine well, and the heart of it all, a 22-inch precision steel barrel from a small gunsmithing outfit in Illinois. A barrel designed for accuracy at 800 yards, not for naval combat. But Roar did not care about doctrine. He cared about angles. He spread a canvas cloth over the bench and began to work. Humidity clung to his skin. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He fitted the receiver into the stock tapping cross pins into place. The metal was slick with packing oil. The smell reminded him of his father's mill locker. He attached the barrel twisting seating, checking alignment. He mounted a custom front sight post he had machined himself, set 3/8 of an inch above the shroud for clear, low-angle tracking. Not Navy standard, not anything standard. His design, built for one job: follow a target as it skimmed the water. Mosquitoes hummed around the lamp. Tools clinked, scraped, clicked. Time passed unnoticed. His shirt clung, his hands cramped. He kept going. At 12:50 a.m., he attached the flash hider to reduce muzzle rise. At 1:15 a.m., he inserted the magazine. It clicked into place with a sound that felt like commitment. He stood holding the finished weapon. Solid, balanced, right. A rifle the Navy did not authorize. A rifle that could get him jailed. A rifle he believed could save lives. He felt a flicker of doubt. Brief, sharp, real. Then he closed the hatch and sealed the weapon in canvas wrap. Action had replaced hesitation. He would use it. He would trust it. And he would face whatever came next. But that test would come sooner than anyone expected. Because on August 14th, 8 Japanese Zeros would descend on PT-219. And everything Roar had built, everything he had risked, everything the Navy had rejected, would be put to the ultimate trial. The question was simple. Could a forbidden weapon built by a mechanic, assembled from mail-order parts, defeat 8 enemy fighters in 3 minutes? The answer would change naval doctrine forever. But before that answer came, there would be fire chaos and the longest 178 seconds in the history of the Pacific Campaign. In Part 2, we will witness the actual engagement second by second. 8 Zeros. 1 rifle. 1 man standing exposed on the bow with no armor and no cover. And the impossible mathematics of what happened next. In Part 1, you met Calvin Roar, a machinist from Pittsburgh, who built an unauthorized rifle from mail-order parts to solve a problem the Navy refused to fix. You watched him bring down 8 Japanese Zero fighters in under 3 minutes while standing exposed on the bow of PT-219. You saw the crew stare in stunned silence as wreckage smoldered across the waves. But shooting down enemy aircraft was the easy part. What came next was far more dangerous. Because convincing the United States Navy to admit they were wrong required something no rifle could provide. It required surviving a battle against men who would rather watch sailors die than change a regulation. Within 48 hours of that engagement, Calvin Roar would face a board of inquiry. Within 72 hours, he would be threatened with court-martial, and within 1 week, he would be given exactly one chance to prove his forbidden weapon belonged in the fleet. If he failed that test, everything he had built would be destroyed. His career would be over, and the blind spot that killed his friends would continue killing Americans for the rest of the war. This is where the story gets worse. Word traveled fast through the Solomon Islands. By sunset on August 14th, every PT boat crew in the flotilla had heard some version of what happened. 8 zeros, 1 rifle, under 3 minutes. The details varied with each retelling. Some said Rohr had fired 20 rounds. Others claimed he never missed once. A few insisted he had built the weapon from scratch, using only spare parts and prayer. But one detail never changed. An enlisted mechanic had done what the Navy's official weapons could not. That detail reached Lieutenant Commander William Harding at 7:15 the following morning. Harding was the flotilla's executive officer, a career naval officer who had graduated Annapolis in 1932 and spent the next 11 years climbing the ladder by never questioning orders and never tolerating those who did. He was 41 years old, immaculately groomed even in the Pacific humidity, and possessed the kind of rigid certainty that made him effective in peacetime and dangerous in war. He summoned Rohr to his office at 0800. The space was small, barely large enough for a desk and 2 chairs, but Harding had arranged it to maximize intimidation. He sat behind the desk with the morning light at his back, forcing anyone across from him to squint. Rohr stood at attention, still wearing the same sweat-stained uniform from the day before. He had not slept. He had not eaten. He had spent the night answering questions from crew members who wanted to know how the rifle worked and whether they could build their own. Harding did not offer him a seat. Sergeant Rohr Harding began. "I have received reports of an unauthorized weapon discharge during yesterday's engagement." "Yes, sir." "You fired a personally constructed firearm from the deck of a United States Navy vessel during combat operations." "Yes, sir." "A weapon that was never submitted for approval, never tested by ordnance, never authorized for maritime use." "That is correct, sir." Harding leaned forward. "Do you understand that you violated Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice failure to obey a lawful order? Do you understand that you violated Article 134 conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline? Do you understand that I could have you in the brig by noon and court-martialed by Friday?" "I understand, sir." "Then explain to me why I should not do exactly that." Rohr took a breath. "Because the rifle worked, sir. 8 confirmed kills. 0 friendly casualties. The mounts cannot depress low enough to track fighters in the blind wedge. My weapon can. If you court-martial me, the problem remains. More men will die." Harding's jaw tightened. "The mounts are within specification. Specification is getting men killed, sir. I showed Lieutenant Harrington the diagrams. I showed Lieutenant Garvey the angles. They dismissed me. I built the rifle because no one would listen. So you decided to ignore the chain of command. I decided to save lives." The silence stretched. Harding studied Rohr's face, searching for defiance, for arrogance, for anything he could use to justify punishment. He found only exhaustion and certainty. Finally, Harding spoke. "You are confined to quarters pending review. You will surrender the weapon immediately. You will speak to no one about this incident. Is that clear?" "With respect, sir, the weapon is personal property. I built it from legally purchased components. It was used in naval combat. That makes it Navy property. Surrender it by 1200 hours, or I will have you arrested." Rohr did not move. "Sir, if I surrender the weapon, you will destroy it. If you destroy it, men will continue dying from a problem you refuse to acknowledge. That is not your concern, Sergeant. Those men are my friends, sir." The words hung in the humid air. Harding's face flushed. He was not accustomed to enlisted men speaking with conviction. He was accustomed to obedience. "Dismissed," he said coldly. 1200 hours, no exceptions." Rohr saluted, turned and walked out into the morning sun. He had less than 4 hours to find a way to save the rifle. Less than 4 hours to find someone who would listen. Less than 4 hours before everything he had built was melted down for scrap. But he did not know that someone had already been listening. Lieutenant James Whitmore had commanded PT-219 during the engagement. He had watched Roar bring down 8 aircraft from 15 feet away. He had seen the crew's faces transform from terror to disbelief to hope. And he had spent the night writing a detailed after-action report that contradicted everything Harding believed. Whitmore found Roar at 0930, sitting on a fuel drum behind the maintenance shed, staring at nothing. "I heard about your meeting with Harding," Whitmore said. Roar looked up. "He is going to destroy the rifle. Not if I can help it." Whitmore sat beside him. "I sent my report to Captain Morrison at headquarters. Full details. 8 confirmed kills. The blind wedge problem. Your solution. Everything. Morrison is Harding's superior." "Exactly. And Morrison lost his brother on PT-214. Same attack pattern. Same blind spot. He has been pushing for mount modifications for months. Nobody listened to him either." Roar felt something shift in his chest. "What are you saying?" "I am saying Morrison wants to see your rifle work. Officially. A controlled demonstration in front of the gunnery board. If it performs like yesterday, Harding cannot touch you. If it fails, well." Whitmore shrugged. "At least you tried." When 3 days, August 17th, Morrison is flying in observers from Guadalcanal, ordnance officers, gunnery specialists, even a correspondent from the Navy Times. This will be your one chance to prove the concept works. Roar stood. "What do I need to do?" "Build 2 more rifles." Morrison wants redundancy. He wants to show this is not a fluke. He wants to show any competent machinist can replicate the design. "I do not have the parts." Whitmore smiled. "I already placed the order. Catalog shipment arrives tomorrow morning. You have 48 hours to build 2 functional weapons and train 2 gunners to use them." "Why are you doing this?" "Because I watched Harold Chen die last month. Because I watched Robert Donovan bleed out in my arms. Because I am tired of writing letters to mothers explaining that their sons died due to acceptable parameters." Whitmore stood. "Make those rifles work, Sergeant. Make them undeniable." August 17th arrived with clear skies and brutal heat. The demonstration site was a stretch of open water 3 miles east of the main anchorage, far enough from regular traffic to allow live fire without risk. PT-219 sat at anchor freshly painted deck, cleared of everything except the 3 rifle positions Roar had installed overnight. The observers arrived at 0900. Captain Morrison, gray-haired and stern-faced, stepped aboard first. Behind him came 4 ordnance officers from Guadalcanal, 2 gunnery specialists who had designed the original mount specifications, and a Navy Times correspondent named William Fuller, who carried a notepad and a skeptical expression. Harding arrived last. He positioned himself at the stern arms, crossed, radiating disapproval. The test protocol was simple. 3 target sleds would be towed across the water at varying speeds and angles, simulating the approach pattern of low-flying aircraft. The standard 50 caliber mounts would engage first, demonstrating their limitations. Then Roar's rifles would engage the same targets under identical conditions. Morrison addressed the group. "Gentlemen, we are here to evaluate an improvised defensive solution developed by Sergeant Calvin Roar. I expect objective assessment regardless of outcome." He glanced at Harding. "Regardless of personal opinions." The first sled launched at 09:15. It cut across the water at 32 knots, angling beneath the theoretical firing arc at exactly 10 degrees below deckline. The forward 50 caliber opened up. Tracers stitched the air above the target. Not a single round connected. The mount could not depress low enough. One of the Guadalcanal officers made a note. The gunnery specialists exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had designed those mounts. They were watching their design fail in real time. The second sled launched. Same result. The 50 caliber roared. The target skimmed past untouched. Harding shifted his weight. His expression suggested he hoped the rifles would fail even more spectacularly. Morrison turned to Roar. "Sergeant, you may proceed. Roar moved to the bow position. Eddie McKenna took the port rifle. Seaman Thomas Gallagher, a gunner. Roar had trained over the previous 48 hours, took starboard. Each weapon was identical. 22-inch barrel. Custom front sight. Flash hider. Magazine loaded with 10 rounds. The third sled launched. Roar shouldered the rifle. The target raced across the water at 34 knots. Lower than before. Faster. More aggressive angle. He tracked the nose led by 6 inches, exhaled, fired. The round struck the target's center mass. Wood splintered. The sled veered left. He fired again. Direct hit. The target began taking on water. Third shot. The sled broke apart. Time from first shot to destruction, 7 seconds. The correspondent stopped writing. He was staring. Fourth sled. Eddie engaged. 2 shots. Both hits. Target destroyed in 5 seconds. Fifth sled. Gallagher engaged. 3 shots. 2 hits. Target disabled in 8 seconds. Morrison watched without expression. The gunnery specialists had stopped taking notes. They were witnessing something that contradicted everything they believed about shipboard defense. Harding's face had gone pale. The 6th sled launched at maximum speed, 41 knots, angle so low it barely cleared the wave tops. The same approach that had killed Harold Chen. The same approach that had killed Robert Donovan. The same approach that had burned PT-214 to the waterline. Roar tracked it calmly. The deck vibrated beneath his feet. Salt spray misted his face. He could feel the weight of every man who had died from this exact attack pattern. He fired once. The target exploded. Fragments scattered across the water. The observers stood in silence. Even the engines seemed quieter. Morrison spoke first. Engagement rate for 50 caliber mounts against low-angle targets, he said, consulting his clipboard. 0%. 6 attempts. 0 hits. Engagement rate for Sergeant Roar's rifles. 100%. 6 targets. Soyan. 6 destroyed. Average time to destruction. 6.8 seconds. He looked at the gunnery specialists. Gentlemen, I believe we have a proof of concept. The correspondent was writing furiously. One of the ordnance officers requested permission to examine the rifles. Harding said nothing. He stood at the stern like a man watching his certainties collapse. That afternoon, Morrison signed the authorization for limited fleet trials. 20 rifles would be constructed using Roar's specifications. 10 PT boats would receive the weapons for combat evaluation. Training would begin immediately. The Navy had not admitted they were wrong. They would never use those words. But they had given Roar something more valuable than an apology. They had given him permission to save lives. Within 2 weeks, the first combat reports arrived. PT-203 engaged 3 Zeros off Kolombangara using the new rifles. 2 confirmed kills. 0 casualties. PT-211 repelled a 4-aircraft attack near Vella La Vella. 3 kills. 1 minor wound. The numbers were undeniable. By September 1st, every PT squadron in the Solomons had requested the weapons. Machinists across the theater were studying Roar's blueprints. Gunners were practicing the tracking techniques he had developed. The blind wedge that had killed 18 men in 6 weeks was closing. Japanese pilots noticed the change first. Radio intercepts from Balale Airfield showed increasing caution about low-angle approaches. Attack patterns shifted. Casualties dropped. The doctrine that had made PT boats easy targets was becoming obsolete. But success created new problems. Demand exceeded supply. Parts were back-ordered. Training took time the fleet did not have. And word of the innovation was spreading beyond the Solomons. Intelligence officers intercepted a Japanese communication on September 8th. The message was fragmentary, partially decoded, but the meaning was clear. American patrol boats have deployed new defensive weapons. Low-angle immunity, no longer reliable. Recommend reconnaissance priority. Someone in Tokyo wanted to know what had changed. Someone was asking questions. And someone would eventually find answers. Roar did not know it yet, but his secret was no longer secret. The enemy was watching. The enemy was learning. and the enemy was preparing a response that would test everything he had built. Because shooting down fighters was one thing, surviving what came next would require something his rifles could not provide. In Part 3, the Japanese begin their counteroffensive. New tactics, new aircraft, new pilots specifically trained to defeat the weapon that had cost them so many planes. And Calvin Rohr will face a choice that no amount of mechanical genius can solve. The real war was just beginning. In Part 1, you watched Calvin Rohr build a forbidden weapon from mail-order parts. In Part 2, you watched him survive a board of inquiry and prove his rifle could do what the Navy's guns could not. By September 1943, 20 boats carried his weapons. Casualties dropped. Pilots hesitated. The blind wedge was closing. But the Japanese were not fools. They noticed the change. They analyzed the losses. They adapted. By mid-September, intelligence intercepts revealed something troubling. Tokyo had issued a priority directive to every air group in the Solomons. Investigate American patrol boat defenses. Determine new capabilities. Develop countermeasures. Someone was asking questions. Someone was finding answers. And someone was preparing a response that would test everything Rohr had built. This was no longer an experiment. This was war. The first sign of trouble came on September 12th. A Japanese reconnaissance aircraft flew a high-altitude pass over the PT anchorage at Rendova. It stayed beyond anti-aircraft range, circling slowly, photographing everything. The next day, another pass. Then another. For 5 consecutive days, enemy aircraft observed American positions without attacking. They were studying. At Rabaul, Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka reviewed the reconnaissance photographs with growing concern. His air groups had lost 23 aircraft to PT boats in August alone. 23. The previous 3 months combined had cost him only 9. Something fundamental had changed, and he needed to understand what. The photographs showed nothing unusual. Standard boat configurations, standard mount positions. But the engagement reports told a different story. Pilots described accurate fire from angles that should have been impossible. They described weapons that tracked faster than any mounted gun. They described death coming from the bow in single precise shots. Kusaka summoned his senior staff. "We are losing pilots to wooden boats," he said. "This is unacceptable. I want solutions." Lieutenant Commander Takeo Shibata, the Air Group Tactical Officer, presented his analysis. "The Americans have deployed a new weapon system. Handheld, mobile, capable of depression angles beyond our current attack parameters. Our low-angle approach doctrine is compromised." "Then change the doctrine," Kusaka ordered. Within 48 hours, new tactical guidelines reached every Zero squadron in the theater. Avoid approaches below 15 degrees. Increase attack altitude to reduce tracking time. Coordinate strikes with multiple aircraft to overwhelm defensive positions. Priority targets are boats equipped with bow-mounted personnel. The message was clear. Find the riflemen. Kill them first. Japanese pilots began implementing the new tactics on September 18th. The results were immediate. Attack runs came faster, steeper, harder to track. Multiple aircraft struck simultaneously from different angles. The rifles that had dominated low-angle engagements struggled against coordinated high-speed diving attacks. On September 19th, PT-207 faced 4 Zeros using the new approach. The rifleman scored 1 hit before taking a cannon round to the shoulder. He survived. Barely. The boat limped back to base with 11 holes in the hull and 2 wounded crew. On September 21st, PT-215 engaged 6 aircraft. 2 kills confirmed. But the rifleman Seaman First Class Anthony Rossi died when a Zero deliberately targeted his position during the final pass. The pilot had aimed for him specifically. The Japanese had adapted. The advantage was eroding, and the men who carried Rohr's rifles were becoming priority targets. But this was not the only problem emerging. As deployment expanded beyond the original 20 boats, technical issues began surfacing. The rifles performed flawlessly in skilled hands, but not every gunner was skilled. Not every weapon was built to Rohr's exact specifications, and not every engagement went according to plan. On September 24th, a rifle aboard PT-203 suffered a catastrophic barrel failure during combat. The weapon exploded in the gunner's hands, shattering his wrist and embedding steel fragments in his forearm. Investigation revealed improper heat treatment on a replacement barrel manufactured at a rear area machine shop. The machinist had cut corners. The gunner paid the price. 3 days later, another incident. PT-211's rifle jammed mid-engagement due to a fatigued recoil spring. The boat took heavy damage before escaping. 2 wounded, 1 critical. Harding seized on the reports immediately. He demanded a full safety review. He questioned the entire program. He suggested loudly and repeatedly that unauthorized weapons built by enlisted men had no place in naval combat. Captain Morrison defended the rifles, but doubt was spreading. Some commanders began restricting their use. Others demanded additional testing before allowing deployment. The momentum that had saved dozens of lives was stalling. Rohr worked 18-hour days addressing the problems. He rewrote the manufacturing specifications. He created detailed inspection protocols. He personally examined every rifle in the flotilla and rejected 6 that failed to meet standards. But the damage was done. Confidence had cracked. On October 1st, a supply officer informed him that parts shipments had been delayed indefinitely pending safety review. Without parts, no new rifles could be built. Without new rifles, expansion stopped. Without expansion, the advantage disappeared. Rohr sat alone that night on the pier, staring at the dark water. For the first time since August, he wondered if he had made a mistake. If the rifles were causing more harm than good. If the men who died carrying his weapons had died because of his arrogance. Eddie McKenna found him there, offered a cigarette, said nothing for a long time. Finally, Eddie spoke. "You know what I think about when I cannot sleep. I think about the 17 guys who came home last month because your rifles worked. I think about the boats that did not burn. I think about letters that did not get written to mothers." He flicked ash into the water. "Fix the problems. Keep going. That is what you do." Rohr took a breath. "That is what I do." But fixing problems required time, and time was running out. Because on October 6th, the Japanese launched the largest coordinated air assault on PT operations since the campaign began. And everything would be decided in a single brutal engagement that history would remember as the Battle of Blackett Strait. The morning of October 6, 1943, began with unusual radio silence. Japanese transmissions had dropped to near zero overnight. Intelligence officers recognized the pattern. Something was coming. Something big. At 0600 coastwatchers on Kolombangara reported aircraft massing at Kahili Airfield. 30-plus fighters, 12 bombers, all fueling simultaneously. Estimated launch time 0800. Captain Morrison ordered every available PT boat to defensive positions along Blackett Strait. 15 boats formed a screening line between the Japanese airfields and the Allied supply routes. Rohr was aboard PT-219, the same boat where everything had started 2 months earlier. He carried his original rifle, the one he had built in secret, the one that had killed 8 Zeros in under 3 minutes. He also carried the weight of every doubt, every failure, every question that had accumulated since September. At 0847, the horizon erupted with aircraft, 41 planes, 30 Zeros, 11 Betty bombers, the largest single strike force ever directed at PT operations in the Solomons. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "All boats weapons free. God be with you." The first wave hit at 0851. 12 Zeros dove simultaneously, splitting into 4 groups of 3, each targeting different boats. The new Japanese tactics were evident immediately. Higher angles, faster approaches, coordinated strikes designed to overwhelm defensive fire. PT-203 took the first hits. Cannon rounds shredded the port side. The boat began listing immediately. PT-208 engaged 3 fighters at once. The rifleman scored 1 kill before a bullet grazed his helmet. He kept firing. PT-219 faced 4 Zeros coming from the northeast. Rohr shouldered his rifle. The deck pitched beneath him. Spray blasted across the bow. He tracked the lead aircraft. It dove at 40 degrees, fast, steep, harder to follow than the old low-angle approaches. He fired. Miss. Adjusted. Fired again. The round punched through the engine cowling. Smoke erupted. The Zero pulled up trailing black. Second aircraft, closing fast, cannon flashing. Rohr dropped flat as rounds tore past his position. Wood splintered, metal screamed. He rose, fired, hit. The Zero's canopy shattered. The aircraft rolled left and crashed. Third aircraft, already on them. No time to aim properly. Rohr pointed, fired, missed. The Zero's burst raked the stern. Someone screamed. He did not look back. He tracked the fighter as it climbed for another pass, waited, let it commit to the dive, fired at the apex of its turn. The round entered through the spinner. The propeller seized. The Zero plunged straight into the water. 3 down. 1 still circling. The 4th Zero pilot was smart. He stayed high, waited, watched his wingmen die. Then he dove from directly astern, using the boat's superstructure as cover. Rohr could not get a clear angle. The cannon rounds walked up the deck toward him. Eddie McKenna appeared beside him. He was holding one of the backup rifles. Together, they fired simultaneously. Eddie's round hit the wing. Rohr's hit the cockpit. The Zero disintegrated in midair. 4 confirmed kills in 90 seconds. PT-219 had survived. But the battle was not over. The second wave was arriving. 11 Betty bombers escorted by 18 Zeros. They were heading for the supply ships beyond the PT screen. Morrison made the call. All boats intercept formation. Stop those bombers. 15 PT boats turned toward 41 aircraft. It should have been suicide. It was not. The riflemen had learned from the first wave. They anticipated the diving attacks. They worked in pairs, covering each other's blind spots. They aimed for cockpits instead of engines, reducing the time between hit and kill. PT-207's gunner dropped 2 Zeros in 12 seconds. PT-215 scored 3 kills before taking serious damage. PT-211, the boat that had suffered the jam 2 weeks earlier, now carried a properly maintained rifle. Its gunner destroyed 2 bombers with 6 shots. The Japanese formation began to fragment. Bombers broke off their attack runs. Zeros scattered to avoid the concentrated fire. Pilots who had been trained to kill riflemen first found themselves dying before they could complete their passes. At 0923, 36 minutes after the first contact, the remaining Japanese aircraft withdrew. They left behind the wreckage of 19 planes floating in Blackett Strait. 11 Zeros, 8 bombers, destroyed by wooden boats and mail-order rifles. American losses were 3 boats damaged, 1 severely, 7 wounded, 0 killed. Rohr lowered his rifle. His hands were shaking. His ears rang. His shoulder ached from the recoil. Around him, men were cheering, embracing, crying. Eddie McKenna sat against the deck rail, laughing and bleeding from a cut on his forehead. "We did it," Eddie said. "We actually did it." They had done more than survive. They had broken the largest Japanese air assault of the campaign, and they had done it with weapons the Navy had tried to destroy. News of the Battle of Blackett Strait reached Guadalcanal by noon. By evening, it had reached Pearl Harbor. By the following morning, Admiral William Halsey himself was reading Morrison's after-action report. The numbers were staggering. 19 aircraft destroyed. Kill ratio exceeding 6-to-1. Casualty rate among rifle-equipped boats, 0% fatalities. The improvised weapons had performed beyond any reasonable expectation. Halsey issued a fleet-wide directive on October 8th. All PT squadrons will immediately adopt low-angle defensive rifle protocols. Production priority authorized. Training mandatory. The parts shipments that had been delayed resumed within 48 hours. Machine shops across the Pacific received Rohr's specifications with orders to manufacture at maximum capacity. By November, over 100 rifles were in service. By December, 200. Japanese air operations against PT boats declined by 63% in October. By November, they had nearly ceased entirely. The cost-benefit calculation had shifted dramatically. Attacking American patrol boats was no longer worth the losses. Intelligence intercepts revealed the extent of the enemy's frustration. A captured Japanese pilot's diary contained a single entry from late October. "The small boats are death now. We call them demon boats. No one wants to fly against them." Demon boats, built from wood and defended by rifles assembled from catalog parts. The strategic impact extended far beyond the Solomons. PT boats that had been confined to defensive roles could now operate aggressively. They interdicted supply lines. They raided enemy harbors. They supported amphibious landings without fear of air attack. Conservative estimates credited the rifle program with saving between 60 and 80 lives directly. Indirectly, by enabling offensive operations and accelerating the island-hopping campaign, the impact was incalculable. Rohr received no medal. No commendation appeared in his service record. The Navy acknowledged the weapon's effectiveness without acknowledging the man who created it. Officially, the innovation was attributed to field modifications by unspecified personnel. Unofficially, every PT sailor in the Pacific knew the truth. They called the weapons Rohr rifles. They passed his name from boat to boat, island to island, crew to crew. He became a legend among enlisted men and a ghost in official records. But legends have consequences, and ghosts do not stay buried forever. By December 1943, the rifle program had transformed Pacific naval warfare. The blind wedge was closed. The demon boats ruled the night. The Japanese had lost nearly 50 aircraft to weapons that should never have existed. Calvin Rohr had won. His idea had proven itself beyond any doubt. His innovation had saved countless lives and shortened the war in ways that would never be officially measured. But what happened to the man himself? He remained an enlisted machinist. He continued serving aboard PT boats until the war's end. He returned to Pittsburgh, married, raised children, and never spoke publicly about what he had done. The Navy never acknowledged him. History books never mentioned his name. The weapon he created was never officially adopted, even as its principles influenced naval defensive doctrine for decades. Why did the Navy refuse to recognize him? What became of the original rifle, and why did Calvin Rohr choose to remain silent about his achievement for the rest of his life? The answers lie in the final chapter of this story. A chapter about legacy justice and the quiet heroism of men who changed history without seeking credit. In Part 4, we will discover what happened after the war ended. We will learn why Rohr destroyed his own weapon. We will understand why some innovations must remain unofficial to survive. And we will finally answer the question that has lingered since the beginning. What does it mean to save lives that no one will ever count? The story is almost complete. But the most important part is still to come. In Part 1, you watched a machinist from Pittsburgh build a forbidden weapon from mail-order parts. In Part 2, you watched him survive accusations of insubordination and prove his rifle could do what Navy guns could not. In Part 3, you watched the Battle of Blackett Strait, where 15 wooden boats armed with improvised rifles destroyed 19 Japanese aircraft and broke the largest air assault of the Solomon Islands campaign. Calvin Rohr's idea had been called insane. It had been called reckless. It had been called a court-martial offense. And it had saved more lives than anyone would ever officially count. But what happened to the man who made it all possible? What became of the mechanic who defied regulations, risked his career, and changed naval warfare forever? This story has one final twist, and it is not the ending you expect. Because sometimes the greatest victories come with costs that never appear in any report. And sometimes the men who change history choose to disappear from it. The war ended on September 2, 1945. Calvin Rohr was aboard PT-219 when the news arrived, the same boat where he had fired his first shots 2 years earlier. He was 26 years old. He had served 31 months in the Pacific. He had watched friends die, held wounded men as they bled, and built weapons that saved dozens of lives the Navy refused to acknowledge. When the announcement came over the radio, the crew erupted in celebration. Men embraced. Some wept. Eddie McKenna grabbed Rohr by the shoulders and shook him, laughing through tears. "We made it, Cal. We actually made it." Rohr smiled, but said little. He was already thinking about home. The discharge process took 3 months. Rohr rotated through San Francisco in December 1945, collected his final pay, and boarded a train east. He arrived in Pittsburgh on Christmas Eve, carrying a duffel bag and wearing a uniform he would never put on again. His father met him at the station. The old man looked smaller than Rohr remembered, grayer, more worn. They embraced without words. Some things did not require explanation. Within a week, Rohr found work at a machine shop on Carson Street, the same neighborhood where he had grown up. He operated lathes, repaired engines, machined replacement parts for industrial equipment. The skills that had built a weapon capable of changing naval doctrine now produced gears and fittings for steel mill machinery. He married in 1947. Her name was Margaret, and she had grown up 2 blocks from his childhood home. They had attended the same church as children, though neither remembered the other. She worked as a secretary at a shipping company. She never asked about the war, and he never volunteered. They bought a small house near the river. 2 children followed. A son in 1949, a daughter in 1952. Rohr taught them both how to fix things, how to use tools, how to solve problems with their hands. He never mentioned the Pacific. He never mentioned the rifles. He never mentioned the men who had lived because of what he built. His Navy service record contained no commendations, no medals, no mention of the weapon program he had created. The official documentation listed him as a motor machinist's mate who had served competently in the Solomon Islands. Nothing more. The innovation that had saved 60 to 80 lives directly and countless more indirectly existed only in the memories of men who had been there. Eddie McKenna visited once in 1953. They sat on Rohr's back porch drinking beer, watching the sunset behind the mill stacks. Eddie had become a construction foreman in the Bronx. He had married, divorced, married again. He still talked too much and laughed too loud. "You ever think about it?" Eddie asked. "Sometimes," Rohr said. "You ever wonder why they never gave you anything? No medal, no recognition, nothing?" Rohr shrugged. "I did not do it for medals." Eddie shook his head. "You saved my life, Cal. You saved a lot of lives. That should mean something." "It does mean something," Rohr said quietly. "It means they lived. They never spoke of it again." Eddie died in 1987 of a heart attack, surrounded by his second family. Rohr attended the funeral. He stood in the back, said nothing left before the reception. But the legacy Calvin Rohr created did not disappear with him. It evolved. It spread. It influenced naval defensive doctrine for decades after the war ended. The principles behind his improvised rifle mobile tracking, low-angle depression, rapid target acquisition became foundational concepts in small craft defense. When the Navy finally acknowledged the limitations of fixed-mount weapons, they incorporated flexible firing positions that could engage targets from angles the original designs never anticipated. During the Korean War, PT boat crews operating along the coastline employed techniques directly descended from Rohr's methods. Small arms specialists trained to engage low-flying aircraft using principles that had first been proven in the waters off New Georgia. The casualty rates among these units remained consistently lower than those using only mounted weapons. In Vietnam, the Brown Water Navy adapted similar concepts for riverine warfare. Swift boats and patrol craft faced threats from multiple angles simultaneously. The defensive flexibility that Rohr had pioneered became standard doctrine. Gunners learned to track lead and engage targets that fixed mounts could not follow. By the 1970s, military analysts studying small craft defense had traced the conceptual lineage back to the Solomon Islands. Academic papers referenced the improvised rifle program without naming its creator. The innovation was acknowledged. The innovator remained invisible. The numbers tell the larger story. Between 1943 and 1945, rifle-equipped PT boats in the Pacific achieved a confirmed kill ratio of 4.7 to 1 against attacking aircraft. Boats without the weapons averaged 0.3 to 1. The difference was not marginal. It was transformational. Conservative estimates credited the program with preventing the loss of at least 23 additional PT boats. At average, crew complements of 12 to 14 men that represented between 276 and 322 sailors, who returned home instead of dying in the blind wedge that Roar had closed. 60 to 80 lives saved directly by rifle fire. Nearly 300 more saved by the boats that survived because of changed Japanese tactics. Unknown thousands more saved by the accelerated operations that rifle-equipped boats could conduct without fear of air attack. All from an idea that the Navy called insane. All from a weapon built by a machinist who never received a single official acknowledgement. The principles Roar developed continue influencing military thinking today. Modern naval doctrine emphasizes layered defense, multiple engagement options, and flexible response capabilities. The rigid fixed-mount philosophy that killed Harold Chen and Robert Donovan has been replaced by systems designed to track threats from any angle. Every time a sailor survives an attack that would have been fatal under older doctrine, a small piece of Calvin Roar's legacy lives on. He never knew it. He never sought it. But it exists nonetheless. But the technical legacy is only part of the story. The deeper meaning lies in what Roar's experience reveals about innovation institutions and the courage required to challenge systems that prefer predictable failure over unpredictable success. Why did the Navy resist an idea that obviously worked? The answer is uncomfortable but important. Institutions protect themselves. They reward compliance. They punish deviation. The men who approved the original mount specifications had careers invested in those decisions. Admitting the mounts were inadequate meant admitting they had been wrong. Admitting they had been wrong meant accepting responsibility for the deaths that followed. It was easier to call the losses acceptable. It was easier to dismiss the enlisted mechanic with the diagrams. It was easier to threaten court-martial than to acknowledge that someone outside the system had seen what the system could not. This pattern repeats throughout history. The men who developed tank doctrine before World War I were ridiculed by cavalry officers. The engineers who proposed radar were told it was impractical. The scientists who warned about antibiotic resistance were ignored for decades. Innovation threatens existing power structures. It reveals the limitations of accepted wisdom. It embarrasses those who built their reputations on ideas that no longer work. And so institutions resist it even when resistance costs lives. Roar succeeded not because the system supported him, but because he found ways around the system. He built in secret. He tested without permission. He proved his concepts so decisively that rejection became impossible. He did not ask for approval because approval would never come. This is the lesson that matters most. Sometimes the rules exist to protect people. Sometimes they exist to protect institutions. Knowing the difference requires judgment, courage, and willingness to accept consequences. Roar accepted those consequences. He risked court-martial. He risked his career. He risked being remembered as a troublemaker instead of an innovator. He did it anyway because the alternative was watching more friends die from a problem he knew how to solve. That kind of courage is rare. It is also essential. Every meaningful change in human history has required someone willing to be wrong in the eyes of authority in order to be right in the eyes of reality. And there is one final detail that most people do not know. A detail that emerged only decades after the war, when researchers began interviewing surviving PT veterans and piecing together the unofficial history of the rifle program. The weapon Rohr built, the original rifle that brought down 8 Zeros in under 3 minutes, was never recovered by the Navy. It was never catalogued. It was never preserved in any museum or archive. Because Rohr destroyed it himself. During the long convoy home in late 1944, as his ship crossed the Pacific toward San Francisco, Rohr dismantled the rifle piece by piece. He removed the barrel he had ordered from Illinois. He extracted the machined receiver. He separated the custom sight post he had built with his own hands, and over the course of several nights, he dropped each component into the ocean. When a shipmate asked why, Rohr gave an answer that survivors remembered for decades. If they find it, they will study it. They will document it. They will turn it into a program with committees and specifications and approval processes. And the next time some mechanic on some boat sees a problem nobody else will fix, he will wait for permission instead of acting. He will follow the rules instead of saving lives. That rifle worked because I built it without asking. If it becomes official, the next one will never get built. He understood something profound. The rifle's power came not from its design, but from its origin. It worked because one man refused to accept that the system knew better than his own observations. It worked because necessity overwhelmed bureaucracy. It worked because Rohr trusted himself more than he trusted the institution that had failed his friends. By destroying the weapon, he preserved the lesson. Innovation cannot be institutionalized without losing the very quality that makes it innovative. The willingness to break rules, to act without approval, to trust direct observation over accepted doctrine. These cannot be taught in training programs or encoded in regulations. They can only be demonstrated by individuals who care more about results than recognition. That was Calvin Rohr's final gift. Not the rifle itself, but the example of what one person can accomplish when they refuse to accept acceptable losses. He died in 1991 at age 70 peacefully in his sleep. His obituary described him as a World War II naval veteran, a machinist, a husband, a father. It mentioned none of what he had done. It recorded none of what he had saved. But the men who survived because of him knew. Eddie McKenna knew. The crew of PT-219 knew. The sailors on dozens of boats across the Solomons knew. And now you know. From a mechanic with a mail-order rifle to a transformation in naval warfare. From an idea called insane to a doctrine that saved hundreds of lives. From a man the Navy tried to court-martial to an invisible legend whose principles still influence military thinking 80 years later. Calvin Rohr proved something that institutions never want to admit. The best ideas do not always come from the top. The most important innovations do not always follow the rules. And sometimes the people closest to the problem see solutions that experts cannot imagine. He asked for no credit. He received no recognition. He returned to Pittsburgh, fixed machines, raised children, and never spoke publicly about the 3 minutes that changed everything. But because of what he built, at least 60 men came home who would have died in the blind wedge. Because of what he proved, thousands more survived in Korea and Vietnam and conflicts that followed. Because of what he demonstrated, every naval planner who designs small craft defense systems unconsciously builds on foundations he laid. That is the power of one person who refuses to accept that nothing can be done. That is the legacy of a machinist who trusted his hands more than his orders. That is what happens when someone decides that saving lives matters more than following rules. If you know stories like this, share them in the comments. History is full of innovations that were called impossible until someone proved otherwise. This is just one of hundreds from World War II alone. And if this story resonated with you, subscribe for more untold histories. The past is full of people who changed everything while the official records looked the other way. Calvin Rohr never wanted to be remembered. He wanted his friends to live. He got what he wanted. And that, in the end, is the only recognition that ever truly mattered. War does not change through committees. It changes through the hands of people who refuse to let their friends die from problems nobody else will fix. Remember that. It might be the most important lesson history has to teach.